All right, thanks for tuning in once again to our fantasy football coverage on the Our Lads Football Network. It's Dynasty, it's OFN Dynasty Fantasy Football with RotoWire.com. John McKechnie is joining us once again. He is the college football editor and also sports betting editor over at RotoWire.com. John, good to talk to you again, and I'm glad we actually got the draft over with in just 1 week.
Likewise. It's great to be back on. And yeah, the draft went really smoothly. I know when we were talking last week, we were just a handful of picks in, and we asked at the end, do we think we'll be wrapped up by the time we record on Tuesday? And the answer, yes, we were able to finish it up on time. I thought it went really, really smoothly all week and weekend long. So everyone was locked in. Everyone, got their cues rolling. Everyone kind of got into the rhythm of things. And yeah, I couldn't be happier with how this one panned out.
All right. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and let everybody know because we're going to show our draft board and we're going to go over it as well. But I want to let everybody know who it is that is participating in our draft. And also keep in mind, our shows every week, especially once the regular season begins, or even as early as next week, is going to be more general about everything going on in fantasy football. It's not going to be 95% about our league, but this is just a great opportunity for us to kind of use our league and our draft as an example, especially for me and a few other guys who have never played dynasty football before that are participating in the specific league. And then we kind of move on. And then like next week, we'll be talking about rookies and move on with free agents and all that other stuff, because there's still a lot of other leagues that haven't even drafted yet. And hopefully we can prepare you as best as possible. And then, of course, we get the league year started like everyone else when the season begins. Okay, so I tell you what, let's go over everybody first over at RotoWire. John, tell us who exactly, and I'll go through their names too. Who is Crispy27?
That is none other than Chris Benzine, an office stalwart, a man who wears many hats. He covers our, let's see, he manages our CFL coverage, our Big Three coverage, a bunch of other sports. So he's really got his hands in a lot of things, but he's also a big help on our college football side. He helps out with projections and helping things run smoothly during the regular season for college football. So he does a lot, and he's very knowledgeable, very sharp with NFL and MLB stuff as well. Always competitive in our in-house leagues. So I knew that he'd be a strong candidate to join up.
Okay, next, who is Ryan Pohl? Is it Poley or Pohl?
So it's actually Ryan Poole. I
Poole.
recently learned myself. I met him in Vegas for the first time on the RotoWire Vegas trip. He does a lot of our sports betting stuff as well. He writes our betting on golf article every single week. So we just ran his latest column today. That's up on the site under the golf betting section. So getting you ready for this next week's event, of course. So he does that, but he's very active in our fantasy football stuff. He was in our Vegas league. He was in my Vegas league specifically. Sharp guy, and I think that was reflected in this draft as well.
All right, I tell you what, I'm going to, while you're doing that, let me move on over and let everybody take a look at the draft so they can
Yes.
see it as we're talking. So, okay, next up, Jim Coventry.
Jim is just a football guy through and through. Jim is a great friend. We've been friends dating back to, I think, 2016, and he's really, really ramped up his role within the company. Last year, we hosted the XM show, the RotoWire Fantasy Sports Today, on Fridays and Saturdays over on XM. He's still doing the Saturday show, so check him out there if you listen to Sirius XM at all, and the Fantasy Channel in particular. He's writing a series of ADP battles that's up on the RotoWire front page right now, I believe. So breaking down, some tough coin flips that you're going to face if you're drafting the rest of August. Check his stuff out. He's really, really sharp on that as well. So he used to be a Chicago Bears fan, and now he famously says he's a fan of all 32 teams. He just dives in on everybody, no bias. It's all about the numbers with him, and he really lives by it. And we'll get to his team, but I really think that he did a great job in this one.
Okay, and then finally, Nick Rawling.
Nick Rawling, a bit of a wild card, a younger fella. He's still finishing up at Wisconsin. I believe he's entering his senior year, but he's been with RotoWire since I believe he was a freshman in college, helping out on CS, customer service. But he has since moved on to some NFL content roles with us, and he's a huge fantasy football guy. Been in leagues with him before, talked back and forth about fantasy football, talked a lot of trash with him. He's a fun dude, just a good energy guy to have in this league as well. So I'm glad that he was aboard, and I think that he definitely earned his keep.
All right. Yes, I agree. We'll talk more about his as well as everybody's draft in just a few minutes. And just taking a look now at the remaining 4 owners. And these are guys that I've been working with as far as on-air talent, analysts on the Our Football Network. It starts with Air Jan, which is Jan Levine. You know, Jan has been working with RotoWire. Hockey is really his top sport. But he's a big New York Jet fan. He's a former season ticket holder for the Jets, living in the New York area. So he does the Jet shows with me every week on Jets FM when the season begins. And we're going to get him on real soon for the first show to talk about the 2021 Jets in the next week or so. Then comes, let's see. Oh, actually, I skipped through Fanamic. Fanamic is Kevin Knight. And Kevin Knight works for the Falcoholic at thefalcoholic.com. That's the Atlanta Falcons, if you had to guess. Their website there to cover the Atlanta Falcons at thefalcoholic.com. So Kevin will definitely be on with me before the season begins to talk Atlanta Falcons football. Then we've got Ryan Dunleavy all the way to the right. A couple of Ryans. Ryan Dunleavy is with the New York Post, of course. Ryan's been on the air with us for several years. He covers all the New York teams for the New York Post, and he will be on with me actually coming up next Monday. We're going to start back-to-back shows. We're going to have our first ever Rutgers show. He's a Rutgers grad. I'm from Jersey. I'm a Rutgers fan. So we're going to, and Eric LeGrand, who's one of the, if you're looking for anybody outside of Greg Schiano, who would be a figurehead for the program, it's Eric LeGrand. He's going to be our first guest on the show.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great.
So he's going to be on next week. And then we're going to start our NFL shows for the season next week as well. We're going to kind of look back at the offseason and catch up on everything going on in the NFL before we go into predictions and analysis on both conferences, and then as we get closer to the start of the season. And then Ryan Talbot, you see there, Ryan Talbot Bills. He works for NewYorkUpstate.com, covers the Buffalo Bills. So you can check out Ryan Talbot's work covering the Bills. Does a great job. I will definitely have him on before the season begins to preview the Buffalo Bills season at some point. So that is everybody. So as you can see there across the board, that is, and they got their little nicknames as well. So, but before we kind of got into it, I wanted to make sure everybody knew up front who everybody was. So let's, I tell you what, let's talk about our drafts first.
Okay.
So, and I'll let you go. I'll let you go first. This was my very first dynasty draft. Your opinion? What did you like? What were your concerns? So forth.
So starting out looking at my team, so I was picking out of the 7 spot. So I went ahead and I wanted to go into this like we were talking about last week. With this being a 2 quarterback format, I knew that I wanted a franchise quarterback to start things off and then work my way back. But that was just a huge cornerstone to me. I wanted to get a young quarterback that can contribute both through the air and on the ground, especially with this being a league where you have 4 points per passing touchdown as opposed to 6. I think that therefore Lamar Jackson, who I took instead of Justin Herbert, that was a really, really tough call, by the way. But when Jackson was still there on the board at 7, I went after him because I figure he's going to provide some touchdowns, and that 2-point differential with the rushing scores, I think that was enough to steer me in his direction over a guy like Justin Herbert. He's still entering his prime. I think the Ravens added a lot more weapons at receiver in the passing game this year, although they're all hurt right now, so that's not great. But nonetheless, I definitely wanted to start out at quarterback, and Jackson was that guy. And then, we talked about last week how the positional values are going to get pushed down, and we're going to have to see how, with the introduction of quarterbacks being taken in the first round, was going to impact the receiver markets. and the running back markets alike. And we saw a bunch of running backs go in the first round. McCaffrey to you at 2, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara. So those are all strong picks. I can't really argue against any of them. But what that caused is a deflation for these receivers. So
were you surprised about that, by the way, compared to other dynasty drafts? Is this normal to have, 7 out of the 10 first-round picks were quarterbacks?
I think in 2 quarterbacks, it's not crazy for that to happen. Maybe it's a little bit quarterback heavy, and all the RotoWire guys all took quarterbacks with their first pick from Chris all the way through to Nick. But yeah, it was a little bit surprising nonetheless. But either way, that caused receivers to get pushed down.
Yes.
So that was the position that we saw get affected maybe the most by the way the first round panned out. And as a result, A.J. Brown, who I think in my mind is the #1 dynasty receiver, I think that he's just a ridiculous talent. I think that you could make a decent comparison to him being a T.O. 2.0, just a physical presence out there, great hands, great run after the catch ability, just a different cat. So I wanted to get him. I was worried that Rawling was going to go after him. I wondered who the first receiver off the board was going to be. He went Metcalf. Tough to argue against that too much, but I really, really like A.J. Brown, so I was excited to nab him with my second pick.
And that's the thing, to be able to get him with your second pick, because he could have easily been a first pick. And that's really just, like you said, though, that's what happens when you draft 7 quarterbacks in the top 10.
Yep. So something is going to get pushed down, and in this case, it was receiver. So after that, I wanted to make sure I left with a running back that I felt was entering the prime of his career. So ideally, when it comes to running backs, we're looking at guys who are still on their rookie contracts, and J.K. Dobbins was that guy for me. DeAndre Swift and CEH were both there as well, but I went with Dobbins. I think there was a little bit of a stack in mind with getting the Ravens run game so much. You have Lamar Jackson there with your first pick, and then you have Dobbins there in the third. I like his upside a lot. I think that even though Gus Edwards is apparently going to get a lot of work as well, you have to think that there are 600 or so carries available in this offense. We saw back in 2019, Mark Ingram pushed for 200 carries in this offense and was one of the top fantasy finishers. I envision something pretty similar for Dobbins this year, and I think that he could see a bit of an improvement as a pass catcher as well. So Dobbins was the guy there. And then coming back around the other way, I was really hoping for Kyle Pitts. I was really crossing my fingers. So he goes the pick before me to Rawling at the 3rd pick of the 4th round. So that sent me tilting a little bit. And I actually was considering the guy that went right after, Trey Lance, but I wondered if I could sneak him through to the 5th. I was obviously way off, did not read the room correctly as far as that's concerned, but regardless, I ended up with Darren Waller in the 4th. I like that pick a lot. I think that he's still got his best football ahead of him. He's such a huge part of that Raiders offense, and I think that that's going to continue for at least a couple more years. So Waller getting a premium tight end in this format, I thought was the way to go. I wanted to make sure I had that locked in.
I noticed that you only drafted 1 running back out of the first 6 picks. Was that by design?
Not necessarily, but I don't love the dynasty prospects of guys like Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs so much. So I went ahead and addressed other positions there. I figured I could just kind of start throwing some darts at the running back position. I know that running back is probably arguably the weakest position on my team, but even still, I didn't want to invest too much just because there's so much volatility at the running back position. Guys can really go by the wayside quickly. I mean, Cam Akers, if we did this draft a month ago, he would have gone in the 2nd round in this one. Now it's a totally different story with him coming off the Achilles for next year. So things change so quickly with running backs with how much they get injured, the wear and tear on them. So I wanted to get some safer assets, some guys that I felt like I could hold on to for 2 to 3 more years down the road. So I went away from running back.
A couple of veterans like Davis and Mostert. And Johnson, of course, too. But mostly Mostert and Davis. That would be your 2 most reliable veterans.
Correct. Yeah. So those are, and Mostert was intentional because I went ahead and got Trey Sermon a little bit earlier on, and maybe I reached for Trey Sermon. I think that's a fair argument. But what we see in dynasty leagues is that guys that are those established vets that might not be in the exact prime of their career might be on the other side of it. We see them get pushed down, but there's still some utility there. So I felt like that was the case with Mike Davis. He might be a one and done as far as my team is concerned, but I think the one could end up being pretty solid, especially as like an insurance policy for a guy like Trey Sermon, whose workload might not be as guaranteed right off the bat.
Okay, talk about the difference between standard fantasy football, if there is one, and dynasty fantasy football when it comes to going with the number 2 running back. Specifically, and I'm not really sure I'm using this as the perfect example because we know San Francisco is like a running back by committee kind of offense. I'm looking at more of like, and I'll use my team as an example. Is that okay? I took McCaffrey, and I think McCaffrey is probably the best example here. But I did not. I thought about Chuba Hubbard several times as I kind of felt he was dropping. He did not go Hubbard until the 18th round. And I was thinking of taking him right around 16, 17, 18, just for that sole reason. And I just kind of felt that some of the players that I took instead of him, I just felt, if McCaffrey doesn't get hurt, I'm basically there's just a spot on my roster that's doing nothing for potentially 3 years. So do I want to go that route, or do I feel like I could grab a couple of players, in which I did, that I felt had some upside, and if I hit the right guy, then I'd feel a lot better that, hey, you know what, instead of a guy sitting there doing nothing for 2 or 3 years, I got a player that could be like, for instance, let's say De'Ami Brown, who could be 1,000-yard receiver in a couple of years.
No, that's a totally fair way of looking at it. I mean, running back, again, is really one of the toughest positions to evaluate from a dynasty perspective because, so much can happen. And like you said, if, you waste it or you take a pick on a guy like Chuba Hubbard, there's just no guarantee that he sees much in the way of work at all to where he would ever be worth being in your starting lineup as long as McCaffrey is healthy. So that I think in that sense, when you have someone who is as steady as McCaffrey, as close to a sure thing, obviously last year being the exception, at the running back position, then it makes sense to not necessarily go after his handcuff, at least earlier than you would like. But with a team like the 49ers, where their backfield is so tricky to figure out, yep. I just knew that I wanted the 49ers run game. And I feel like, with the way the injuries have shaken out with Jeffrey Wilson this offseason, we're still, Elijah Mitchell, kind of a total unknown as far as how he's going to fit into that offense. I just figured get the top 2 guys, let them sort it out. If I need to, I'll just start Dobbins and Mike Davis until there seems to be some sort of consensus number 1 guy, or David Johnson, another example of someone it's not a sexy pick whatsoever, but who's taking carries from him in Houston. And, they're going to have to be throwing the ball a lot as well. But I just figured he at least had the floor. So I knew that with the low floor pick of a guy like Sermon, I wanted to beef it up with guys like Mike Davis and David Johnson that aren't necessarily high ceiling, but at least are going to give me, those requisite 15 to 20 carries every single week.
Okay. So that's something where the question regarding the running backs, the depth, taking the number 2 against the 1, that's just there's no set rule. It's basically everybody's different. Every situation is different for the team where you're going to draft that number 2 guy. It's not like you go into a draft going, oh, I'm never going to do that, or I'm always going to do that.
Right. Yeah. The worst thing you can ever be in fantasy is rigid to one dogma or another, other than, maybe waiting to take a kicker in the last round, that kind of thing. But even then, like sometimes it makes more sense to take Justin Tucker around earlier or something like that. But yeah, you need to just be able to adjust your views, and you see how the draft board unfolds one way or the other. You see who's getting pushed down, see what kind of running backs are getting pushed up in this particular instance, and just kind of feel it out. So yeah, you need to be able to be reactive and proactive in this type of format. And again, with the dynasty angle, we don't know where some of these late round running backs are going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, especially the ones that are running out of their rookie deals. So that's just kind of my analysis on how to approach running back from dynasty once you get outside of that clear top crop of guys.
Okay, before we move on to the rest of the league, I want to go over my draft.
Yes.
And the thing that when I was looking at it, my strategy, I was pretty pleased with the way the strategy went. When I looked at the board and I went over my rankings and I decided, and I was looking at what I liked, what I really felt was that I could get a lot of younger, talented receivers with upside if I waited and was more patient. Didn't mean that, again, just like you said, that that's where I was definitely going to go, but it kind of worked out that way for me because the quality of running backs were available to me early. So being able to, I did not think I was getting McCaffrey. Let's first of all, let's get that over with, because I was very surprised that Kevin went with Patrick Mahomes first. I was just sitting, I actually was ready to take Dalvin Cook the whole time. So Mahomes went off the board, and I was like, okay, well, do I go after McCaffrey? Or, I mean, so I actually had to think about it, but I went with, I thought, which was the way to go, which was McCaffrey. And then Henry came up in the second round, and I think maybe he was available because of the quarterback run as well. But I was a little bit surprised that he actually was available after, let's say, I don't know, I'm not Jonathan Taylor. I think Taylor's up there. Maybe Gibson. Maybe I was a little bit surprised about that. And then Jones in the third round. So did you think that where I was able to grab those three running backs were at the spots that I should have grabbed those three running backs?
I think so. I think it ended up playing out really well for you. I mean, you were one of the few teams that like truly waited on quarterback, and by waited on quarterback in this format, waited the
Yes.
first three rounds, but you still managed to get guys like Aaron Rodgers in the fourth and Matt Ryan in the ninth. So that you can figure out your quarterback situation later, and now you have a definite position of depth from which to trade if you need to for a quarterback later on. So you've set yourself up really well by having three elite running backs, three guys who in standard drafts, in standard redraft, are going in the first round. So that's a really, really nice setup you have there. And then the big bet that you made again was eschewing receiver in the early portion of the draft and hoping that some guys would fall to you. And I mean, I got to hand it to you. It really played out nicely. I mean, I have Jerry Jeudy in like 60% of my best ball drafts that I've done thus far, and I'm looking to bump up that exposure. Actually, I think that he's just a guy who's going to take off this year, even with Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater playing quarterback. Imagine what it's going to look like next year when they have a good quarterback. And then you get a guy like Tyler Lockett, nice high floor. I know he had some splash weeks last year, and maybe the floor wasn't there at certain points, but I still really, really like Lockett where you got him. Elijah Moore, one of my favorite rookie receivers. I think he might be like the third best one when it's all said and done from this class. And then Michael Pittman, things have gotten crazy in Indianapolis this week, but I still think he's a talented guy. He's that clear red zone type of big-bodied guy that can make plays down near the goal line. So for a build that started out with no receivers through the first 6 rounds, I think you couldn't have turned it out too much better than that.
And the quarterback situation, after going with the two veterans, I was, first of all, I was thinking Zach Wilson. Jan went ahead and took Zach. When he did that, the only other young quarterback I had left that I was really considering was Mac Jones. But then it's interesting because Mac wound up going, I believe, just before I went and took Wentz. And I was kind of thinking about Mac Jones at that spot. Wentz is more of, he's still going to be 29. He's not old. If he gets healthy and it works out in Indianapolis like it did a few years ago at Reich, then I've got a young enough quarterback in the prime of his career and I'm in pretty good shape. And then the Love move was basically, this is one of the last good young quarterbacks left as far as young aspiring quarterbacks. And it's just, to me, a perfect fit considering I have Aaron Rodgers as the starter, because he could be gone next year.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, if Love comes in and plays well, I'm in a good situation because I got Rodgers playing somewhere else and Jordan Love is playing good for the Packers.
No, that's absolutely right. So that was a nice double dip on the Packers quarterback room. And yeah, I think it's it's fair to speculate that Rodgers is not going to be in a Packers uniform this time next year. So Love, he would be the odds-on favorite to be the starting quarterback for the Packers in 2022, unless something crazy happens this year and they end up in a draft position where they can take one of the big guys for next year. But I think, with their investment in Jordan Love in the first round, it would be shocking for them to not at least kick the tires and give him a shot. So, where you got him in the 13th, especially with some of the other guys out there, like a Jared Goff, we know what he is at this point, not overly exciting. Jameis Winston, we don't know what that whole situation is going to shake out like in New Orleans. And then you get down into the dregs, really. So Love at least has that plausible upside that you mentioned for down the road.
All right, now let's switch this over again. Make sure okay. So we're back on the board, or away from the board. But I still, of course, want to go over everybody's. And let's start with Kevin's first with the Mahomes. How surprised were you that he went with a quarterback first? Is Mahomes the clear number one guy, right?
Yes, he is. I mean, he's the only, $500 million quarterback for a pretty good reason. He's just an unbelievable talent. Still, like we don't even know if he's played his best football yet. And his football that we've seen to this point is some of the best quarterback play we've ever seen, if not the best. Just an unbelievable player. He plays with a style where I think we can project, pretty good durability. I think you can say something a little bit different about the guys that went after him. Kyler Murray, a little bit smaller. Josh Allen plays with that reckless abandon. Dak Prescott, we saw the injury, and Lamar Jackson, exposing himself to a lot of hits, with all those runs. Mahomes just like has it all. I think Trevor Lawrence, it maybe challenges him a couple years down the road, but right now it makes all the sense in the world for Mahomes to be the number one pick in a 2 QB dynasty. I think that was the right move. And then, moving elsewhere, Nick Chubb, I think one of the best pure runners. He just got a new deal, I think, after the draft started. So he's going to be in Cleveland. That's a really good team context, really good situation for him. I love Nick Chubb. I'm a Georgia Bulldog, so of course he's my guy. I think that was a strong play at that particular stage of the draft. Travis Kelce, he's one of those guys that we're seeing him go in the first round of regular redrafts this year. We don't know how much prime he has left, but if Kevin has designs on competing for the title this year, it seems like he does, then Kelce, that makes all the sense in the world to go after him.
Yeah, matter of fact, and we're going to definitely, hopefully, be able to get all 8 owners outside of you and I at some point during the season as a short guest appearance, so we can talk a little bit about their teams. That's the one thing that I would think that he was doing, is because there are a lot of veterans that he decided to go with. Mahomes is not a veteran, but you have Kelce, like you mentioned, and you have Zeke, again, not a veteran, but a lot, pretty much is wear and tear there. Mike Evans is interesting. When you look at a fantasy situation and then just overall, it seems to be different, because Mike Evans appears to be one of the better, more consistent, high-level receivers in the NFL over the last several years. Yet, this was pretty much his draft slotting. Why is that? Is that because a lot of people thinking of that? If you take a look at inside the numbers, he's going to go down based on what happened last year. But still, no matter what, as long as he's playing games, he's consistent.
Yes, Mike Evans really is one of the most consistent receivers, fantasy producers in the game, period. He played through some stuff last year and still was able to turn out, what ended up being an excellent season by his standards. I think he might be the only receiver to ever start his career with 6 1,000-yard seasons, or it might be 7 at this point. So yeah, that consistency that you mentioned there, I don't think that's going away. Maybe it's fair to question whether he's reached his ceiling, and I think that Tampa Bay has a crowded enough group of pass catchers. When you have guys like Chris Godwin, when you have Rob Gronkowski, at least for this year, and then some up and coming guys in that offense as well. Your Scotty Millers. They got the guy out of North Texas in the draft this year, Jalen Darden, that kind of stuff. So I think it's fair to question whether he can reach another level. But if this is his level and he just stays there, then that's great. You're starting that every week.
And by the way, I don't think anybody took Darden, correct? I think he's still available.
He very well may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had some funky names there down at the end.
Yeah. He's
I got in
available.
on that as well. So
And
okay.
then Gronk's available. I know he's
Yes.
available. And then, I actually was thinking about Antonio Brown and the same round that Ryan took him. Because at that point, I was going, oh, wait a second. He's still around. And this is maybe a good value spot now for him because he's got an entire offseason now with the team. He's clearly still a very good receiver. Even in limited reps, he had a good season last season. So it's like we forget about him. But I think part of that is, and this is something you have to avoid, is your personal feelings about somebody. And I think sometimes that comes into play a lot. I don't want that guy. Yeah, he's just, he's an ass, or or I just can't trust him. I don't know. But at the 15th round, I mean, I thought that was a really good value play.
Yeah, it should be. And when you're taking someone like that in the 15th, where it's a little bit mercurial, but you already have your potential starting receiver
Yes.
group already set, then that's a nice first guy off the bench to have that you can swap in for a guy like a Marquise Brown, his cousin, actually, or something like that, or Devontae Smith
There
if
you
he's
go.
not ready to start the season, that kind of thing. So yeah, no, that's a great like first guy off the bench type of depth to have.
And by
Absolutely.
the way, Ryan also drafted Deshaun Watson, the other like so-called problem child. And I
Hmm.
thought that was also a pretty good spot in round 8. Where is he going right now? Where is his at? Is the 8th round, a pretty good place to take him?
This is the only dynasty startup I've done this offseason, so I'm not completely sure what the ADP looks like for
Okay.
him. It's such a kind of radioactive
Yeah.
situation to say the least. That I don't know if there's a
Not
consensus.
enough
I
data
see
yet.
him.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. We see him go as like the last pick or so in some redraft leagues, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's something that where obviously, if things work out and he's the starter this year, then that's a huge value. But you have to assess the risk that
Yes.
there's pretty good potential he does not play another down this season or ever again.
And if he does come back and play, it's not going to be Houston. You feel that. And if he winds up playing for a team like, say, the Eagles, which has
Mm.
been rumored, you have to feel pretty good about where you took Deshaun Watson at that point. So Ryan
Sure.
Dunleavy picking up both Deshaun Watson and Antonio and Marquise Brown. You mentioned Akers. Now, Akers ended up going in the 8th round. Jim Coventry went with Akers. What do you think about the area in which Akers went?
That's a fine pick. That is his second running back, so that's a little bit concerning. But at the same time, he was able to double back, grab a guy like Zach Moss, who obviously is playing this year. Maybe not in the most run-heavy offense or anything like that, but he'll have a role nonetheless. And then Damian Harris, I thought in
Yes.
the 11th was a nice way to kind of bolster things. So if he's rolling out Antonio Gibson and Damian Harris to start the season, I think he's in a fine enough spot. I was very interested going into this what the market would kind of turn out for Cam Akers because we don't have a ton of sample size of big success stories for running backs coming off of Achilles, but very few of them, if any, were really on the same level talent-wise as Akers when the injury occurred to them. So we don't really know what's going to happen. So there's a huge range of possibilities, and when it comes to the 8th round, I think that's a fine enough dart, especially if you cover yourself with a couple depth options like a Moss, like a Damian Harris afterward, and then
Okay.
just kind of stash Akers away for down the road.
Now, uh, Nick, if I had to look at the owner that I really liked their first 6 picks, it would be Nick.
Okay.
Herbert, Metcalf, Adams to get Devonta Adams in round 3. Get Pitts, who could be the best tight end in round 4,
Hmm.
and then you come back with Mixon and Jacobs. Now I know you just mentioned you're not big fans of those guys in particular, and I wanted to ask you why that was, but I just felt okay where he was able to get Mixon and Jacobs. Now the only thing is though, it's his top 2 running backs. It's not like that's 2 and 3, but still, tell me about what you thought about those 6, and then definitely I want your opinion on why that. You mentioned you weren't too sure about Mixon and Jacobs.
So yeah, for your first six picks, getting Herbert, two elite receivers, and what like we mentioned could be the best tight end in football by next year or 2 years down the road. That's awesome. And then guys like Mixon and Jacobs, they just don't excite me as much as maybe some of the other running backs. I mean, Mixon, we all know that everyone has their Mixon story as far as like going after him in DFS or going after him in season long and getting burned one way or the other. The talent's there, but does he play the whole season? Is that offense just going to implode on itself? I mean, it sounds really dire in Cincinnati from what the beat writers have been saying thus far. So I'm just a little bit worried about Mixon as far as what the top end workload looks like for him, but he doesn't have a ton of challengers in that
True.
backfield either, so he should have a pretty good monopoly on those backfield snaps. As for Jacobs, I like him a lot in redraft. I like the decreased ADP for him, but for dynasty, I'm just not completely sold that he's going to be the Raiders' starting running back even by next year. So we'll
Okay.
we'll have to see what happens with that. Obviously, they bring in Kenyon Drake. I'm not too worried about him, but I think if Jacobs has a bit of a diminishing returns type of season again and flops a little bit relative to expectations, and the expectations are lowered this year, this time around, then, I think maybe the Raiders start thinking about moving on or starting to, maybe have him in more of a secondary type of role in that backfield. So I could be off base, but that's my read on it right now. So with that, I just don't love the dynasty prospects necessarily for either of them. But I mean, they're both fine enough in redraft. I don't have any Mixon, but I do have a fair amount of Jacobs when he falls into the fifth round.
Okay. And then, by the way, as far as Nick is concerned, I noticed that he has three Dolphin receivers: Fuller, Parker, and Waddle. So he went to end the quarterback, Tua. So there had to be some sort of strategy there. Is he a Dolphin
Yeah,
fan?
he's a Packers fan
Oh,
actually. And so he was very excited to get Devonte Adams, but yeah, I think that he must have just kind of let the draft come to him. Tua, falls to him in the end of the seventh, and then only just a few picks later to start off the eighth round, going after Waddle. That's a great little combo. And then I think once you kind of have those two guys. You can start to dream on, maybe stacking things up a little bit. So it made sense when Fuller's available to him at a good ADP to go after him, or when Devontae Parker, same situation. So yeah, no, he having that Dolphin stack is not necessarily the spine of his team, but something that if it starts to pop, which it could start to pop as soon as this year, then he has a real chance at coming for the trophy this
yeah.
year.
The other thing that I noticed is that he has both Tampa Bay running backs, Jones and Fournette, back to back. And I also noticed that he's got both New Orleans quarterbacks in Winston and Taysom Hill. So he's kind of covered himself there a couple of times. I was actually surprised Ronald Jones went to the 12th round. I was thinking of, I was like, I think it might have been that round. I was like, look, if he gets to me now, I'm taking him. I was a little bit surprised. I don't know if he's getting enough respect. I know last year was his breakout year, but yet then Leonard Fournette came in and kind of stole a little bit of thunder there. I still think Ronald Jones has some pretty good upside, but I understand that there's still questions.
Yeah, I mean there are. So he was able to back himself up, cover himself, like you said, grabbing both real options in that Tampa backfield, and then it's kind of fun to go after both Winston and Hill. So that you're going to be dropping one of those guys pretty early on into the season, but that's okay. I mean, when you have a 10-team dynasty, there are still some pretty decent free agents that we have out there, even though we went 20 rounds deep for this one. So he'll be able to figure it out. I'm sure that we both have guys that we have circled on our rosters that wouldn't mind parting ways with necessarily after the second, third week of waivers are concerned. So we'll just keep an eye on it. But he's got himself set up. He's got a bit of a fail safe there. He has the New Orleans quarterback. We don't know
Yeah.
who it is yet, but he has the New Orleans quarterback right now. If Herbert or Tua, they hit their bye week, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I didn't mind at all the Winston let's go for it kind of deal because you don't know. I mean, you really don't. When you
Right.
have Sean Payton running the show there, he's had a year off. You just don't know what you're going to get with Jameis Winston. He's got the talent, he's got the coaching now. So I think in the 14th round, I have no problem with that at all. As far, by the way, quickly on some of those free agents, because you mentioned, did you? I mean, I kind of noticed that, and I would guess this is normal, that there seems to be a good amount of decent tight ends left in free agency. So, because I didn't even have a second tight end until my last pick of the entire draft, and I'll tell you right now, I was going to take Russell Gage. And then Jan stole Russell Gage from me the last pick because I was like, wait a second, I think Russell Gage could be 1,000-yard receiver this year in Atlanta's offense. So why wouldn't I pick him up in the 20th round? But Jan picked him up, and then I went tight end. I figured, okay, let me get my second tight end. And I really just put a flyer out on Hollister because he's reunited with Allen, his college teammate. Let's see what happens. But I noticed, too, we mentioned Gronk. You've got Austin Hooper. Yeah, and Njoku, the two Cleveland tight ends, all three of them actually. Zach Ertz is still available.
Yeah, Ertz I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole, but I mean Gronk, I think, if you needed a second tight end for this year, I don't know how much longer Gronk is going to be able to play, but I think he will be effective for at least this season. So as a short-term stopgap guy, I like that just fine. Austin Hooper on a pretty lucrative deal with Cleveland has apparently been having a pretty good camp. So definitely have my eye on him potentially as a pickup. I think that he'll be one of the first free agents scooped. Blake Jarwin, obviously coming off the injury from last year, but he's someone that a lot of people were very, very interested in going into the season for Dallas until that injury occurred, of course. So yeah, there's just a handful of guys out there. I mean, it's not a who's who, and maybe there's not a ton of upside out there, but there could be some decent fill-in type of options there on the free agent wire, specifically when it comes to tight end.
Yeah, I was also young tight ends. I mean, I'm really interested to see how Kyle Granson fits in with this Indianapolis offense. But he's, because he's a rookie. Dan Arnold, I think I could see him having he was surprising last year, and guy in a small school, so it took him a couple of years. Carolina needed a tight end with some receiving skills. I could see him, especially with Darnold there. That'll be something, the Darnold-Arnold connection. And then Chris Herndon, I would have taken a flyer on him late, considering him with Hollister, but I don't know, I think I've got enough time to be patient with someone like that, with Zach Wilson at quarterback, because there's only so many weapons, and it's a rookie quarterback. And if I like Chris Herndon, I could probably pick him up anytime during the season I want him, or maybe even again next year.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's going to fight you on Herndon necessarily. I think it might just be you and Jan if you're the Jets guys.
Even though he's got the talent, but he got to prove it. He had it in the first year. He's lost it.
Yep.
As far as next year's draft, what are the differences that we're going to see? Obviously, I'm pretty sure I understand them. The veterans are gone, most of them. So what does the draft look like after you begin a dynasty league and you go into year 2 and 3 and so forth?
So this is just like the free agent draft, but people will be holding on to whatever cards they have remaining, and guys that they are trying to build around one way or the other. So really, those drafts as we move forward in this dynasty league, they are going to be very like rookie focused, rookie centric. So we saw Travis Etienne, Najee Harris be like the first guys off the board this year. Trevor Lawrence, Kyle Pitts, Trey Lance, those type of dudes were the first ones off the board. So we'll see a very heavy rookie presence, I'd say, through the first 2 rounds or so. And then you start to see some of the less flashy free agent guys, the veterans that are still available, that you can kind of squint hard enough and find a little bit of upside. But yeah, it's really that first round of a given dynasty draft. Once you get past that first year draft, it's very, very rookie focused, and things get a little bit just maybe not as appealing as you get a little bit further down. You get some of the more unwanted vet types.
And so season ends. What do? Do you have to drop players before you draft so you have the spots open? How does that work?
Correct. Yeah. So what we will have, a drop date for getting your rosters down to whatever number we decide on. Maybe someone will want to keep everybody and not do a draft pick. I doubt that would happen, but that kind of thing. So people will kind of churn the bottom of their rosters, probably have 4 or 5 spots available at the very least, and open themselves up that way. And then of course we'll go in reverse order. So whoever finishes last will have the first pick in the rookie draft come next year.
Okay, and then the situation when it comes to when you, I mean, the players you can pick up in the draft. We had obviously 20 rounds for a reason this year. What is that like after that? Is there a number? Is it like, okay, we're going to have 5 rounds, or is that just same thing? Every league can determine what kind of how many rounds they want, or is there
I believe it goes until all the rosters are full.
Okay, got it. So basically, you go into the draft, you know beforehand how many spots are open, and then you know how many rounds there'll be.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. Glad I'm picking up on this as we're doing the show, because it does make sense. All right, so again, next week, and we might touch up on a little bit more what goes on here. What's the next step, by the way, for our league? What are we doing now?
So I mean, we just finished the draft this afternoon. We will have the first run of waivers probably the week before week 1, so that week after Labor Day, I want to say. That'll be like the next big step here. Maybe some people
change our minds.
Yeah. We'll get a feel for it. We got a few weeks. We got about a month to go until things officially kick off.
And it could happen. Yeah. I mean, we got a whole preseason to go. I mean, we could be impressed by certain rookies that are still out there.
That's true. All right, so we will absolutely have to determine a specific waiver date for that first one to run, but that will be the next step for us, and then we'll get on closer to the season.
All right, sounds good. And again, next week we will kind of take a look more about just breaking down rookies. We want to go into that, maybe even second-year players, that might be ready to break out in their second years after a quiet rookie season in 2020. So that's what we're going to talk about on next week's show. John, appreciate it as always. What are you working on right now for rotowire.com?
So let's see here. We're still churning out baseball betting articles every single day, but college football is launched.
Oh,
yeah. So we got over 1,000 players projected. It's crazy. We're getting ready. I'm waiting for that first DFS slate to get launched so I can start digging into that week 0 slate that's always extremely wacky. And then, of course, Labor Day weekend is when things really get rolling with that. We'll have tons of sports betting stuff for futures and whatnot here over the next few weeks, as well as people want to start plopping down some last minute cash on some dark horses for the Super Bowl, for MVP, all that good stuff. So we'll have all that coming out here as well.
Yeah, I can't wait. I've already sent out, I think I did about 40 interview requests for college football, and I'm getting really good feedback. So we're going to have a lot of really cool interviews with beat writers, a lot of guys that follow their college football teams. It should be a lot of fun. I can't wait to start talking college football real soon. And we'll talk more about that as well whenever we have the opportunity. And next year, I'm going to get into college football fantasy, but one major new obstacle at a time. Dynasty Fantasy Football NFL next year. I'll kind of ask you what to research, what to keep my eye on this year for next year in college football, so I know what to expect when we open things up for college football next year as far as fantasy is concerned. But first things first, we'll talk more Dynasty Fantasy Football next week and every week. Tuesdays is when we film. We'll post the show usually Tuesday night into Wednesday. Please subscribe to our channel here at YouTube. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, especially for John, go ahead and ask away. And John will definitely get back to you and answer whatever questions that you have right here on the YouTube channel on our page here. So again, John, I appreciate it. We'll talk more next week right here on OFN Dynasty Football, Fantasy Football with RotoWire.com. Thanks, John.
Absolutely.